Okay. So hi, John.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
So we somehow I saw you on the Glamorous Toolkit Discord the other day, and we decided to dive into a session to maybe give you a tour of Glamorous Toolkit. So let's start with this. Like, what do you think Glamorous Toolkit is?
Well, maybe it would help if I tell you how I came across it. So I've
Absolutely.
been working in Emacs for a long time, and I came across this package called Moldable Emacs, and I started trying to figure out what is it doing and what is a mold and how does it how would you integrate it into a workflow, and that got me to your toolkit. The Glamorous Toolkit as a kind of moldable environment. And I think I've seen some things from Conrad Hinson tweeted or posted about in the past. So I'm loosely familiar with it. It sounds like some Pharaoh environment that you can do a lot of things that sound like things I've done in Emacs, but it's obviously not the same when I look at it. So that's what I'm interested in kind of learning more about. Like what is it in your mind?
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so the reason the Glamorous Toolkit exists is because our goal is to make the inside of software systems explainable. And so the way we think this should happen is by treating everything that comes that happens, every problem that occurs in software development we look at it as a kind of a tiny data science problem. And for every one of these, we construct a tool. Hence, what moldable development relates to is that we construct tools actively during problem solving. It doesn't mean that the environment is extensible. It means that the environment can be changed while working, and that by doing that, we can enhance the way we work. But the process is the key, not the tool. So, and now obviously Emacs is or was from the very beginning a language, like an environment that extended the language with an interaction language, and that you could program it from inside, just like you can, for example, Smalltalk. What we are trying to do in Glamorous Toolkit is to get to a new development workflow, a new development flow. And in the process, we happen to stumble across other properties like that maybe these are also related to, to knowledge management, for example. That's something that we've played with more recently, or to getting non-technical people be able to or use. So extend the notion of an integrated in the I in IDE stands for integrated, which basically should mean that every time you leave that one, you should never want to leave. So you should have all the incentives to not leave. And so it's also extends to people that are non-technical. So that's the basic, that's the background of Glamorous Toolkit. It does start from it started specifically focused on how do I get the development problems explainable, and then extends towards other parts.
Yeah, it sounds like there's really a lot of overlap in what you've been trying to do with this and what I've been trying to do in Emacs, where we also are interested in knowledge management and how to encode knowledge into our text documents, into our code documents, and how to be able to navigate through them. I guess we're probably using different words for similar ideas of how do you explore a project and how do you get into what that means.
So one of the key parts, I'm sure that there is overlap. One of the key observations we started from is this idea that in fact software, like reading, should be perhaps a secondary, like reading text should be a secondary activity. it shouldn't be the primary activity by which people understand what's inside the system. So there's a significant investment in that side of the world. The other part is, of course, also where there will be significant differences is in the graphical parts of it. So like I know, for example, I've been looking a little bit about at your work, right? So adding graphics into Emacs is an endeavor, but as soon as you add the graphics, the graphic is in a different world than where the rest of the Emacs is. Those are not, they are not natively compatible worlds. While in Glamorous Toolkit, we started with, we constructed a graphical framework that is by default welcoming both visual and textual representations that can be mixed in arbitrary forms. So this is like at least some basics. And then there's also a number of things that are specific for example, for analysis of software. But maybe I can give you a tour of Glamorous Toolkit.
Yeah, that would be great.
So I guess you see the window now. So that's what you get when you open Glamorous Toolkit, and here you have a number of entry point tools, entry points into the world that we use to start. So for example, the simplest thing to start from is something we call it playground. And this is like, you can think of it as a REPL, and you mentioned Faro. Indeed, Glamorous Toolkit is being built in Faro, which means it's a small talk system by default. And this is like a workspace in Smalltalk, except that you can have multiple kinds of snippets. So like in the simplest form, I can do something like, I can say something collection with all subclasses. And now all of a sudden I am inspecting I get here an object here on the right-hand side, and I see here an ordered collection with 170 items. And these are the items here. This is an inspector. So normally an inspector looks like this, variables and values. But here we have multiple representations for the same object. And this is a key part of the environment. So we think that because software is so contextual, there is no single perspective that is the right perspective. There are always multiple perspectives. And as a consequence, we need the environment to allow us to customize these perspectives as we go along. So let me resize this a bit. Okay, so
this is a collection of like subclasses that are currently loaded in your playground.
No, not in the playground. So this is a Smalltalk image. It's already, these objects already exist. This Smalltalk image probably has like 1 million objects, not classes. These are classes in this case, but they can be other objects lying around. So for example, this button over here is an object, this one over here, this text box here is an object. They're all objects. So let's say, for example,
is this like if you were in a Python environment and you wanted to see all the modules that were loaded? And
for example, right? Or a class, list me all the classes in a, give me all the subclasses of a certain class, for example, right? You would be able to use reflection in that case, and you would get those, right? Or you could see, give me all the functions in Emacs. Would be the same. Okay, good. So now I have those, but maybe I can take one of these, any of them, and if I click on that, I actually go to that class, and here I can see, okay, this is an inspector over that class. So this is now, it shows me a comment, it shows me the definition of the class, it shows me the methods. I can take a look at those. These are just, I'm just in an inspector at the moment, so there's nothing really specific here. And then even in this inspector, I already have, you can see here kind of like this is markdown. And in this markdown, I can already play with things. For example, I can go and inspect. I have these buttons and I can play with them with this code directly right there. But let's say I put this one in the collection. And now I have this, I executed this code again to get the variable in the collection variable. So now this collection variable is populated. So if I'm inspecting this, I get that. So let's say, for example, now I want to just visualize this one. I want to see the hierarchy of these classes. So I can say, I want to create a visual object in this case, and this visual object is empty. And now I will put in this visual object. This is like a Fluent API. This M here, Mondrian, and it gives me nodes, and I can say, give me the edges. So if I just put the nodes here, I now created nodes. And then I say, I want to create edges. And then I say connect from, and each of these classes knows how to answer. So each of these classes, this is a block closure here, so a lambda. I can say, give me the superclass. So now you notice how there are lines in between those. So I can now say, maybe put them in a tree. So now I can see the tree. Okay, now what's interesting here is that these things here, they are not just dots, right? So if I click on that, that's the actual class that I have in there. So I can go on and I continue playing with things. So here, basically, I just took something that was just a query, then I transformed it into a visualization. And then not only did I transform into a visual, I can go and directly continue the conversation with that visualization. So this is part of the, this basically the flow. So a lot of our conversations with our systems or with any problem, even data problems, actually follow this flow. Like I'm going to say, what is the most interesting view? What is the most interesting query I need to write so that I can narrow the scope of what I'm looking at? And then when I do end up reading, for example, here, I do end up reading something, I want to know that I'm reading an interesting thing, because on a screen I can have maybe so many lines, maybe 20, 50 lines at a time. So I need to know why this 50 and not the other 100,000 that I can possibly look at. So the choice of what should be on the screen when I do invest in reading, I want this to be an explicit choice.
So can you apply this kind of what you're showing me to text documents, where you might look at a collection of text documents and they have structure, they have sections, subsections, etc.
Of course,
they're linked in different ways, so you would see that you would have the same kind of graph that show how your documents are connected.
Yeah. So here, this let's start a note here. So here I can say, so this is, as I said, this is a snippet. Let's actually open the previous one that I created. So this is, I actually have a database here of multiple of these playgrounds. So there's like a knowledge management system built in. And let's say that I'm actually interested here in saying that I'm going to now say I want a new snippet, and I want a text snippet here, and say this is a visualization of the class hierarchy, right? And maybe I can move this one up, and I'll make those children of this. So, and then here I can say this relates to, and I'm going to say, I want to say Mondrian. And I don't know what Mondrian is. And now I'm going to click on this one, and I'm just opening another page that I just created in my knowledge management system, Mondrian. And I can say Mondrian is a visualization engine. So now I have two pages here, right? I can see, okay, this one actually comes from here. There's a backlink here, so they're bidirectional. pages. So maybe I can give this one tutorial. I give it a name as well. So now when I'm going to start again in my database, I can see, okay, I have a tutorial over here. And then I have the Mondrian view, the Mondrian page that I had before over there. So now there are links between those, right? So there's a link going from this tutorial to that one over here. So there are multiple ways in which we can play with this, but let's actually take a look at the more complicated database. So another thing that starts, so Glamorous Toolkit ships with already a knowledge management base, which is a book that documents Glamorous Toolkits itself. And so one of these, the interest here is, for example, how do I visualize the current database? So here I have a snippet that says, has access to an implicit variable, which is called this snippet. So if I inspect this snippet, I actually have access to the object behind, to the logical object behind this snippet. And then if I say the snippet database, I'm going to get access to the database. And if I list all the pages, I'm going to have all the pages, right? And so now I'm going to take exactly the same Mondrian because now it's still a graph here. So kind of the same kind of transformation tool would work. Only in this case, when I look at this, I have just created a visualization of pages. So these are now, every one of these is a page. So if I click on that one, I'm going to go to the page. And I just created this one in place, right? And I can say, okay, look, actually this one over here is probably not interesting because that's like the table of contents. So that's not going to be related to everything. So let's actually remove it. So if I look at this one, it's called Glamorous Toolkit book. So here I have a snippet which says, okay, from those pages, right? So here I initialize this pages variable. From all these pages, reinitialize this pages variable with all the same pages, but reject the one that is called Glamorous Toolkit book. So if I do this and I run this one again, now I have a different one, right? I can still see a much more interesting kinds of relationships. So I can now click on those and I can see parts that maybe are more connected, for example, if this is of interest. But then maybe even more interesting is that, well, whenever I look at these kinds of graphs, like generic graphs, they are interesting. So they do give me some impression, but there's no, it's just a quantitative description of my database. But when I look at my database, I actually always look at for something specific. So let's say, for example, that I'm interested in finding the engine behind this is called Lepiter. So let's actually find all the pages here in this database that are called Lepiter, or that have Lepiter in the name. So when I'm going to use the same kind of visualization, but now I'm highlighting those that have Lepiter in the name, right? And I can see, okay, this one over here looks more like something interesting. So I can go and navigate that one. Yeah. Does this make sense?
Yeah, so far it does. If you wanted to say convert this image, the page that I see on the left, that looks like a, you know, like a nicely rendered view, but suppose you wanted to make it into a PDF that you could send to somebody. I assume there's like that you can get access to this as a data structure and then transform it.
So anytime I see, for example, this is an element here.
Yeah.
And any element could say here self save as PNG or something like this.
Okay.
And you can go and interact with it. But basically, this is like a full, interesting graphical object that can even export to into other kinds of graphical representations, like, for example,
Yeah,
SVG.
I mean, the page, how to visualize the current database. Could you convert that into a PDF document
This
that could
one.
be, yeah, that you could send to somebody? Like in principle, could you?
Yeah, of course. In fact, we already have, but our focus right now is towards HTML, but PDF is
Mhm.
also around the corner.
Okay.
It's just not was not the first thing we played with.
Yeah.
So you have a way to get this one and export it into an HTML that you can even load back. So we also
see.
have a transport mechanism that that also deals with the artifacts as well. So here, in this case, I just have textual artifacts, but there are
Mhm.
situations in which they are more complicated kind of scenes. For example,
But they're fancy
let's see.
textual
So
artifacts, right? Because I see you have syntax highlighting in them, and that's certainly something you would want to preserve in your HTML or LaTeX or
right,
PDF.
but it's still textual, which means that, for example, right, a single HTML file would be sufficient here. So it's just one single file. But if you
Oh, I
have
see.
something that would be rendered as a picture and embedded
Yeah.
into the page, then all of a sudden a single file is not enough. You need to go send a whole archive, and we have built a transport, a generic transport,
Mhm.
archive system, which is something we call HDoc, but it's not particularly relevant. It's just
Mhm.
a way to transport
The snippet that you had
data and
highlighted,
different kinds of things.
in that snippet you had highlighted, is there a way to reference that snippet from another place?
Yeah, so every one of these objects, yes, it's not built in into the syntax, for example, yet,
Mhm.
but every one of these ones have a unique ID, and you can reference to that, yes. And there's all the facilities are in place to have fine-grained references between these. We are going so far now as to actually we have a bidirectional links. So Lepiter has a bidirectional link support that can connect arbitrary objects. They don't even have to be pages.
Mhm.
So let's say, for example, so when I'm building my knowledge graph, and I see a picture that is interesting, I still want to be able to refer to it without the picture being copied. I don't want to refer to the copy, I want to refer to the original one. Or it can be any objects. I want to comment about something in a software system, for example, and that comment should be external to the software system. All of those should be possible for us to connect to things. So when it comes to this this generic so these ways of referring to something. So here's for example, a tutorial in which we teach something we call example-driven development, which is examples are like tests that return objects. So typical tests are just they just void methods. Like they don't return anything. You just do something, you assert something, boom, done. And in this case, we said, well, that's kind of like an interesting thing because you're going through the trouble of setting up an interesting object, like you're setting the state of your system in a certain way. You're asserting that the system has a certain interesting property, and then the best way you can possibly do is throw this away. And you say, well, that's kind of like a waste, because especially in an environment where I can have conversations with my objects, then I might not want to throw them away. So in fact, for us, all tests are opportunities for documentation. So here's an example. So here I just have it says, well, first of all, create an example like this, and then this is what you might see in a book, right? In a book, you might say, type this one into your, right? Open a workspace and type this into your workspace, right? So in this case, create this class and then create this method.
Mhm.
But so this tutorial here doesn't say, here's a snippet that you should just copy paste. This is actually a diff, which says, and so the diff, this is a diff widget that allows me to actually just, compile it right in place. So when I'm following a tutorial, I'm going to just execute the diff associated with So the action associated with this diff, and then it created. And so here I have a snippet which just embeds the code that they've just compiled into a widget, and I can go and interact with it. So here I can see a method called create file in memory, which is the same one that the tutorial said, don't create this one. And then here it says, well, this one actually creates a file system in memory, and then inside of it, it creates a sample text txt file that has this content, so sample contents. So if I actually execute this, right, I have just executed that thing. And then it says, okay, you actually get a file reference called sample txt and has contents which are sample contents. I'm inspecting this. And this inspector now is inside the document that I'm playing with.
Mhm.
So you can start, once you have these operators, then you can start combining them in all sorts of funny ways. And then we apply the same kind of thinking throughout the whole, like, it's not here's something for this domain, but here's a set of operators that you can combine in many, many different ways. So what Glamorous Toolkit is at the end of the day, or the way we look at it at least, is that it's the environment itself is a language. Is a language made out of visual and interactive operators that you can combine in many, many different ways to support many, many different contextual workflows. So, so here, for example, there are other kinds of let's see if I find this one rendering tree. This is actually in the book, and here I have a snippet that embeds a slideshow. So I can go and now zoom into it, and I'm just going into a whole new space where I'm just playing that slideshow. And this one just here is to show, for example, here I have a little text editor, and I'm going to select something. And now I'm showing how the tree of elements in that editor is, how the whole thing is made of elements. So I can see, for example, here I have a cursor, I have some selection, and then I have a red rectangle in the middle of the text. So here I have the editor. This is the graphical object, and I can see I have a second or an object here for the first line, another object for the second line, and the red one is just some element, which is just like all the other elements. So including the space here, for example, is an element. The cursor is an element. So we're basically representing this. We're calling the representation here something a one rendering tree. And so at any given moment in time, we're showing everything in a single tree. So
has anybody thought or is working on integrating a Jupyter client into Glamorous Toolkit?
You can embed, so you can import a Jupyter notebook into Glamorous Toolkit.
And then you can run the cells and it talks to a Jupyter kernel?
We didn't do that part necessarily because we have our own integration with Python and JavaScript, for example. So you can execute code from our environment to the other environments.
I see. It'd be interesting to have a real connection to a Jupyter kernel. Then you could have R or Julia or like any Jupyter kernel that is supported would then be accessible, right?
Absolutely. Except that I think this is I think that's absolutely relevant. Still, the question here is not how do you execute something, but how do you debug something? Because it's so there's so much focus today on how do you put something quickly on the screen, but the real cost in software development, and that's what we're focused on, is how do you deal with the system that you already have. And how do you go to the next one? So when we say we have integration, for example, with Python and JavaScript, we already have debuggability. We can debug those from inside the same kind of framework. We can have interaction with other kinds of runtimes. So maybe I can show you one, which is this one. So for example, if you go to this URL over here, HTTP API GitHub orgs fincom, that's our organization, you will get a JSON like this. So by the way, this JSON is actually, this JSON here is a live, we got it live by executing this example, which actually does that. It fetches the thing. So, and I'm just showing you. So if you go here, you're gonna get something like this. Okay, so let's say that I want to start browsing this one. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm just using an HTTP client to just get the contents of that, right? And I'm inspecting this, and I get an inspector over a string, because that's what you see when you get a string like that, right? So, but now I know that this string actually is a JSON. So because I know it's a JSON, it means I can go and inspect it like this. So if I say, because here I said I'm going to use a parser that understands JSON and transforms it into some data structure. In this case, it's a dictionary, because that's what that JSON contains. Right. So for example, here I can see, okay, I have repos underscore URL, and this one points to another URL. Then if you go there, you're going to get information about the repos from our organization on GitHub. So let's actually do this. So if I'm now inspecting this, I'm going to take this dictionary that was the result of that you see here, and I'm going to put it now into a named object. So I basically I put this dictionary into just a class that holds that dictionary. But this class now, because you can define, it's not just a dictionary, it's just a generic thing. I can put anything in a dictionary. But now I say, I know that in this dictionary, there is an organization from GitHub. So I give it a name, GH organization. Now, because I have a name, I also have a scope for my tools. My tools can now discriminate between the dictionary that produced this class versus some other dictionary that produced some other kinds of data, right? And because this one now has that ability to discriminate, now all of a sudden I can say, well, I can have custom made views. So here I have a repositories view, right? And somewhere here, yeah, there's for example, Glamorous Toolkit, and I can go in there and I can see, okay, these are the contributors there, right? And for example, this is me, and I can see what kind of things I've done. And I've done some things for this one. I've done something for these other projects. I can maybe see the avatar or some other information. But basically, with my little tiny inspectors, it's something that maybe takes minutes to build. You have a browser over some arbitrary API, basically. Cool. And so that's what we are saying, like the tool becomes many things with little effort. And we can build these kinds of views while we work with it. So actually, let's go through the process of building such a view. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say my organization, which of course doesn't exist, right? This is a new class that I'm trying to define here. And I'm going to do exactly that I've done here before on top. Right, so now it says, okay, this doesn't exist, so maybe you want to create it. And I'm going to create it, and I get a dialog right in place, which I say, okay, it's just yeah, I'm going to a subclass object, and I'm going to put it into my my GitHub package, and I say okay, and now it says, okay, raw data is not understood. So okay, I'm going to go and create it. And I can know that I can create it in this class here. Here I'm saying, and I get an editor in place. And I know this one because I can statically figure out, right? I just look at this one and say, okay, this blah, blah, new. And so I'm going to put this method in this class. And so I'm going to say, okay, I want my raw data, like a variable, to hold this dictionary. And now, of course, this one doesn't exist, so I should create that one. So I created an instance variable, a slot inside my organization, and I'm going to accept the code. And now I'm going to just work with it. So now I have an instance of my organization that holds a raw data variable.
What is the
But
scope of this definition? Is it local to this
system-wide.
document? It's system.
No, it's system-wide in this case, yeah.
And is it automatically loaded when you open Glamorous Toolkit, or do you have to do something in this document?
This is not in, so this here I compiled, there's an image and everything that I do exists within that image. So when I created this class and when I compile this method, I put it into where all the other classes and methods exist. So when I search for it, right, my organization, the global search is actually going to find this, and I can open it in a static browser now. And I can see there's a package called my GitHub. There's this class. Now, if I close the image, this will disappear because it's not saved anywhere. If I save the image, next time I will save the image, I'll have this one available. But images are not supposed to be something that I keep for longer periods of time. So what I want to do is I want to externalize it to somewhere else so that when I'm going to build my whatever next image, I will take that code and I put it here. So for example, from here, I can go and put it on GitHub. I just publish it on GitHub, and I'm just going to load it next time. Next time I'm going to work with it. Okay.
So in some sense, this is transient for this session, unless you
do some explicit actions. Yeah. So okay, so if I look at this organization, I have this raw data over here. I can go indeed into it, and I can see, okay, I have this dictionary over here, but it's like, it's not nice. I mean, I'm 2 steps now ahead. I would like to see a view here of what is happening on the other, right? Like I want to compress my navigation, because like my ability to go through whatever is very limited. Like anything I do manually is very expensive. So I want to compress as much as possible everything. So if I open here if I look at this raw data, I can see that I have this repos URL. So if I say raw data at repos URL, I should get exactly this string. Right now, when I get a URL like this, I know I've already done this once, right? If I say the same thing is here, and I put this one in a variable, and now I'm going to execute this, it's going to give me a longer JSON. Right now, once I have a JSON, then I'm going to do exactly like I've done before. And I'm going to say, okay, let's put this one in a dictionary. So maybe I'll say this is a JSON, and then I'm going to parse that JSON. So if I'm going to do this, it's going to take the JSON, parse it, and I'm going to have a list of dictionaries, right? And it's limited to 30 when you're not logged in. So if I have this one, I can directly go into my organization. I would like to have a new view. And a view is nothing but a method. So here in my organization, as I expect, if I look at it, I see I have a slot called raw data, and I have a setter, which is called raw data, that I pass a dictionary, puts it into an instance variable. I'm going to create a new method, which is say, I'm going to create a raw data view. I just give it a name called raw data, and I say I'm going to annotate it. This is an annotation called pragmas in Faro, and I'm going to say I want here for example, just a list at the moment. The title is going to be repos, and then in the items I want to say, well, so what do I put in the items? In the items, I've just put this one over here. Exactly like I got it from from my from my snippet over here, right? Because it's just in the same, it should work, right? So I'm just gonna, oops, I declared this wrongly. Yeah, never mind. I put this in as an instance variable, but it doesn't matter now. So I now have this, and I'm gonna say I want a dictionary, the associations for now. So if I do this now, a new view appeared here, and now I'm gonna have, it's already an array, so I don't need to do anything. I'm gonna have this one already, right? And then if I look at one of these, let's say some of these will be the name of it. Homepage. Okay, HTML URL, that sounds like an interesting thing. Okay, full underscore name, right? So if I'm gonna say, oops, I can go over here, I can say, I think it's item text. And given for each of these, I'm going to be each at full underscore name. And if I do this, it should list me just those, right? And then, of course, I can go on exactly doing the same thing I've done before, right? But so
Yeah.
with a few minutes, right? I have all the tools I need to go and explore the data. And once I understand something about the data, I will accumulate it in a tool that will allow me to take the next step and the next step and the next step. And we do this for absolutely every single problem we have. We decompose all software engineering problems like this. It turns out to have, we can transport the same kinds of lessons into what one would do with personal data, or how you would go and reason about the external sources that we have out there. And there are many other layers like that in the environment.
This looks a lot like a graphical Lisp machine, where you can kind of go in and change things very dynamically. I do have to run in a minute, but I wanted to ask, one of the things that I found really missing in this space is collaborative editing. So like we're talking, but I'm watching your screen and I can't actually type on it. And there's pretty limited options. There are some, but like none of them are great. Do you see any space for that where you can co-edit documents?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so the way we look at Glamorous Toolkit is this was a vehicle for us to learn how it's possible. Like we literally at this point in time, we don't read code. We maybe read the code for a fraction of the time as it was supposed to be before. So we've learned a lot by doing that. Now, Glamorous Toolkit is I think it's an interesting, there are all sorts of interesting things inside of it. I think, but this is not the ultimate solution. And so like, for example, collaborative, anything that augments one's ability to communicate with the other one is mandatory in a system. We've just explored a certain avenue that has never been explored before. We've learned a lot from it. We've embodied everything we know in Glamorous Toolkit, but I think this is by no stretch that this is absolutely not the end of the conversation, and definitely there's a space for it.
Yeah, it's really, really cool, really beautiful way of interacting. Like you say, you don't read it, but you're kind of interacting with and experiencing the code, right?
Exactly.
In a very different way, not like it's a narrative text to be read.
Yes.
And yeah, so I certainly appreciate the introduction and demonstration of the ideas. It's clear there's a lot of things here that either aren't possible or are super difficult to do with Emacs, for sure. Great. Okay. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to checking things out and seeing where it goes.
Excellent. Thank you. And let's keep the conversation going. Bye.
All right, thanks. Have a good day.